Hey everyone, Ali here from Dental Medical Counsel, and we're going to talk about how to buy an optometry practice. It is one of the hottest things that's happening right now, and so we're going to go into some details of things to consider. Right off the bat, it's important to know why you're thinking of buying an optometry practice versus starting one from scratch. And there's a lot of really good reasons. One is that, well, on your first day, you're going to have a steady stream of patients, most likely, which is a huge advantage. Number two is your costs are going to probably be lower when you're buying an office than when you're doing a startup, building about a brand new office. These days, construction costs are through the roof, so buying an office can be much more kind of streamlined. Another reason is that you'll have a staff full of well-trained employees. Well, hopefully they're well-trained employees, but you'll have a staff of trained employees, and that's definitely an advantage. Now, is it enough to just have these three things? Are these the only things to watch out for when you're buying an office? No, I mean, of course, these are the items that make it advantageous, and there's of course a lot of advantages to doing a startup as well, which we'll talk about in another video. But I want to talk about how to make sure you're minimizing your risk as you're getting in to purchasing this office. And the way we minimize risk is we do something called due diligence. Due diligence is basically your homework that you must do as a buyer when you're buying someone else's practice. And so it's really important that you pay attention to doing this and doing it well. And a lot of times, young optometrists, when they're ready to buy a practice, they forget this, they get all kind of excited about the office and forget to do this homework. And this homework is really what allows you to minimize your risk and allow you to kind of increase the likelihood of success. So one of the things to consider is the location of the office, right? And so where is the office located? Is it in a retail shopping center? Is it in an office building? Where is it located? How is it located as compared to where you want to be and where you are living? That is a very important consideration because a lot of times if you live in the community that your office is in, it creates sort of this natural marketing force that helps you kind of grow your practice. But so that's something to think about. Another thing is to do a demographic study. As you're thinking about buying these offices, it's important to look at the demographics of the city and determine, is this a growing city? Is it a city that's shrinking? Are people moving out of town? Are employers staying or are they leaving? All these things are important things, considerations to think about, as you're thinking of locations that you've identified as good cities that you may want to buy in. So doing this demographic study is awesome. They're really straightforward, and there's a lot of really good things out there, or really good companies out there that do this for you. And so that's important. And then the second aspect of the location is, what about, what kind of practice do you want? Do you want to be a retail type of practice? Do you want a storefront? Do you want to be more in an office building with other professionals and things of that nature? They're two very different types of practices, of course. Both you can be super successful. There's not a magic bullet. One is not necessarily more successful than the other. It's just different. And so you got to know, what your personality is like and what you want to get out of the practice and how do you want to market the practice. And so those two things are very important things to keep in mind when we think about location. Okay, so that is important. The next thing is, as you're doing your demographic study, is to drive around the neighborhood. And I know this sounds kind of silly, but it's important to drive around and see what kind of changes are you noticing, right? Are you noticing, big buildings being built? Are you noticing apartment complexes and construction being done? Or are you noticing a lot of homes for sale? Are you noticing that people are leaving town? These are important things that you don't necessarily get unless you really are driving around and you're looking at the local news and you're looking at local newspapers and things of that nature and getting a sense for the area. And then once you have that, it gives you a really good sense of is this a city that you can be in? And of course you want to look at how many other optometrists are there in this location or nearby this location. Now, I never worry about competition. I think competition is sort of overrated. As long as you differentiate yourself in your city, you can do great. And differentiating yourself could mean the way you decor the office. It could mean the way you use social media and other things in the office. It could mean a lot of different things, to you. And so differentiating yourself is a powerful thing. And we have optometrists who are in the same city with 5 other optometrists, and there may be only 100,000 people or 60,000 people, and they're all doing great. They're all doing great. So competition is not necessarily a huge concern, but it is something to keep in mind as you're thinking about buying someone's practice. Okay. Now, the second part of it is, now, what are you going to do as far as buying in? Are you going to buy the entire practice, which is a complete purchase, or are you going to do a partial purchase, like a partnership? These two things are very, very different, right? Very different. And so a complete buyout basically means that the seller is most likely retiring, or maybe they have multiple offices and they want to minimize the number of offices that they have, so they're selling one. There's special things that you have to be aware of in those situations, of course, but depending on whether it's that or a partial buy-in, it's important to keep in mind, okay, what is the seller wanting to do? Are they retiring? Are they going to stay back and work for you maybe for a couple days? That never hurts. Unless the practice is super small, it's always a good idea to keep the seller working back for a few days, because there's going to always be patients that prefer them than you. And so while you get warmed up with the patients, it's good to have them there for a few days. Now, you tend to pay more, of course, for a complete buyout, because you got to get an evaluation done and things of that nature. And you have to make sure that you know all about the practice, right? So looking at the financial data, looking at the tax data, looking at the patient data, and things of that nature are crucial aspects of a full buyout. Now, a partial buyout is even actually more risky than a full buyout, if you can believe it. And the reason is because you're entering into a partnership. So you're basically entering into a marriage with the seller there. And so you got to make sure you guys are compatible, and going to the same school and things of that nature, being part of the same local clubs, doesn't really tell you much about whether there's going to be good symbiotic relationship there. So you want to make sure you get to know them, right? Take them to lunches and dinners, and see if it's someone that you can really mesh with. Are your priorities aligned? Do they spend the same way you would want to spend? Do they invest in the business the same way you would want to invest in the business? There's a lot of situations we deal with where there's an older seller who doesn't want to sell out 100%, but they're willing to sell 30, 40, 50% sometimes, but they're not willing to invest in social media and other marketing efforts. And then the younger doctor who's buying in suddenly feels really frustrated because they do want to spend those monies to build the practice. And so it creates an automatic stress, and so you don't want that as your first opportunity when you're buying in. The other part of a partial buy-in is that you're really entering into, like I mentioned, a marriage, right? A partnership. And so we have to get a partnership agreement together. And so again, it's important to be on the same page with them, because those are the things that make a difference. Those are the things that really kind of can break up a relationship, is if we don't have a full, well-planned partnership in place that spells everything out, buyouts down the road, and what if you have disagreements and things of that nature. So important to keep those things in mind in terms of a partial buy-in. Now, of course, it's going to cost less when you buy in partially as opposed to a full buy-in, but you have to think about it long term, right? If you spent, let's say $500,000 to buy 50% of the practice today, what are you going to spend to buy the other 50%? Is it another $500,000? Is it going to be potentially more if the practice grows? These are, again, discussions to have, up front. And so as we kind of move towards the discussion of valuations, practice valuations, it's important to keep in mind that these are opinions, right? They're called valuations, but they're really opinions. They're opinions by whomever it is that you hire to do a valuation for you. And because you're an optometry practice, it's going to be based on cash flow. Now, cash flow means that it's all about profitability, right? Whatever income comes in after expenses are paid, whatever the profits are, the value of the business is based on that, on the profits. And I'll give you a quick example that I think can drive this point home. If you have $1 million practice that does, let's say, $100,000 of profit, that's going to be less valuable than $1 million business that does $500,000 of profit. Of course, that makes a ton of sense. So we don't base it on the top line revenue, we base it on the profit. And every bank out there, that loans to optometrists will look at the cash flow, right? They will look at the cash flow. But an evaluator will do a couple of things, right? They'll do, a partial valuation based on the income, like we were just talking about. They'll base some on the assets. So they'll put some, value on that, the tangible assets, the intangibles, the frames, all the stuff that you can put your hands on, and sometimes you can't, like goodwill and reputation. So they'll use that. And then they'll also look at the market value of other optometry practices in the area and what have they sold for. And then they'll use that as well as part of their analysis. And then they'll come up with a number. Generally speaking, it's going to be somewhere between 1 to 2 times profits, okay? 1 to 2 times profits. If you're a high-flying practice and you have a lot of new patients and you're killing it with the frames and the contact lenses and you're doing a lot of other, treatments on patients, then you might have a higher value, number. It might be 2x, it might be even slightly more. If your new patient counts are low and you're not in a sort of a hot area, the office looks kind of old, you've got dated frames and things of that nature, then of course it might be on the lower end of that. So it'll be somewhere in that range, but again, all of it depends on profitability, as that's really the name of the game. Okay, now let's go to, I think, the most important point about buying an office, which is doing the due diligence, right? So we've been talking in general about some of the high level stuff, but now is really where the rubber meets the road, because you've got to get into the due diligence, and that's the homework you need to do. Now, there are 3 major kinds of due diligences that you have to keep in mind. One is financial due diligence. So financial due diligence is where your CPA and the bank jump in and look at all the numbers, the tax numbers, the returns, the P&Ls, all the financial data having to do with the practice. And they will look at it in great detail and give you their thoughts on what they uncover. Now, it's really important that you hire an optometry CPA or someone that has a lot of experience with optometry offices, and a bank that also does the same, lends to optometrists. And the reason is because they uncover things that no one else would. Now, every CPA out there will raise their hands and say, yes, I have an optometrist client, or yes, I work with optometrists. Because they may have 1 or they may have 2, and they're just doing some, bookkeeping for them. That's not what you want, right? What you want is someone who specializes in optometry, has done a ton of transitions, because that person will be able to tell you if, for example, your cost of frames and things is higher than it should be, or if your cost of other supplies or your team, HR and things is higher than it needs to be, or maybe sometimes lower than it needs to be. Okay, and so there are a lot of scenarios where sellers try to play around with some of these numbers, and so you need an expert to look at it. Okay, you need an expert to look at it. So that's financial due diligence. Then there's legal due diligence, and legal due diligence is my part, right? As the lawyer, we get in and we review the lease, we review the asset purchase agreement, we incorporate you, or we create an LLC depending on what state you're in, so that you have protections there. We help you hire your employees on the HR side and set up payroll and all of that. So we walk you through all of that stuff, which is considered the legal due diligence. Now, there's a lot more than I just described that we do, but those are sort of the high level things. And those are very important because, of course, this is going to probably be, after your home, your second biggest purchase that you will ever make. And so you got to make sure that you are protected and there are no skeletons that you don't know about, because when you're buying a practice, that's the biggest risk, having skeletons that you don't know, that you find out down the road. Okay, so we help you avoid that by doing our side of things. Again, we are specialists in optometry. This is a lot of what we do, and so we've seen it all, and we can help you and uncover a lot of the details that a lot of people can't do. All right, the third portion is the practice management due diligence, and this is where you hire a consultant, again, an optometric consultant who knows what they're doing with optometry offices, and they will go in and they will review the office inside and out, not for the tax returns and that stuff, but for other things, right? They'll look at the new patient counts and how many new patients are coming in, how many patients are leaving through the back door, right? So what is your net new patient count? Are patients coming in and just getting their prescription and then buying somewhere else, or are they staying and buying from you, or are they staying and trying to buy from you but your optician's not doing the job, and then so they're leaving and going somewhere else? All these things are things that a consultant can tell you about the practice. Now, you don't want to share this report with the seller usually. Why? because this is valuable information, right? This is information that the good consultants will tell you, things that you can turn around quickly. So after you buy the practice, you turn around these things, and then you suddenly have a much more profitable practice than the seller had. You don't want to share this with them because they could do it themselves and then increase the profitability of the practice or the revenues of the practice, and then you pay more for the practice, and that would be silly because you paid for it. So you don't want to do that, but it's really, really good info. There's not a lot of great consultants out there, but there are a couple that are really great, and we can refer you to those. Same thing with the banks. If you want, we can refer you to some of those that do a really good job. The banks, some of them are always kind of going up and down. Some are better than others at different times of the year and different years, and so it's not always the case that it's the same good bank all the time. So just kind of keep that in mind. So that's the due diligence part, a big part of your homework. It sounds like a lot, and it is, but when you rely on trusted third parties to help you, it actually goes really smoothly, and we typically end up kind of quarterbacking a lot of this, and so we'll make sure we refer you to the right people. And when everybody does the job at the same time and they do a good job, you'll get results because you'll be able to make a decision about, yes, this is the practice I want, or if you find things that you don't like so much, then you work on those and you try to overcome those by the time you buy, or at least you're aware of it so that when you do buy, you can deal with it immediately afterwards. So again, hugely beneficial. All right, so the final thing is accounts receivable. This is money that patients have paid, or owe, I should say, to the practice at the time of sale. So there's a couple ways of handling this. You could buy the accounts receivables from the seller, or you could just collect it for the seller and then give that money to the seller, and then they pay you a certain percentage for your effort for collection. We don't recommend buying AR because you just never know if it's good AR or bad AR, are patients going to pay or not pay. So we recommend getting a little bit more money from the bank for your working capital, and generating your own accounts receivable moving forward. The seller's accounts receivable can remain with them. You'll collect it for them for 90 days to 120 days, and they'll pay you for that hard work. But if it's not collected, that's on the seller, not on you. All right. So that is some of the high level things, really important things that I want to talk to you about buying a practice. Make sure that you speak to someone like me, an attorney who specializes in optometry. We'd be happy to help you with it. We can give you incredible guidance. We can hold your hand through the whole process and guide you through it. Of course, we all, it's always our first time, buying a practice, and so don't feel like you're alone. We're here to help you kind of get through it, and it's not so hard once you have a plan. But when you don't have a plan, it seems overwhelming. But remember, the number one thing I always say is that, as an optometrist, with the student loans that you have and everything else, it's vital, absolutely vital, that you become an entrepreneur and own your own business. When you do that, you have the greatest chance to get to financial independence. You have the greatest chance to play tax games and pay off your debts quickly. There's a lot of advantages to it. So if you are in that mindset, if you're somebody who wants to be an entrepreneur, this is the time to do it, and we'll help you. So feel free to reach out. We'll chat soon. Take care.